communities are known, and we must cooperate with law enforcement agencies to make sure that, and that message must come through, to say communities are not passive recipients, and then the ANC branch must become strong. Therefore, we resolve in terms of how do we strengthen that. We're going to strengthen our Department of Information Publicity to play a critical role in making sure that the ANC communication machinery is strengthened across, including at the level of a branch, to say maybe at a branch level, we must have a branch spokespersons who are going to then say this is the position and communicate eloquently and fluently and clearly. But we also said the message of the ANC cannot only be carried by ANC leaders and ANC spokespersons, it must also be carried by the totality of its membership. Therefore, ANC members at all material times must be aware of what are the policies of the ANCs and positions of the ANC, and we must continue to have those deliberations so that an ANC leader can be able to articulate. For instance, on service delivery, if we talk about water, electricity, access roads, and whatever is the concern of the community, an ANC leader at a branch level, an ANC member, they have access to the councillors because it's them who have elected them, other than ordinary members of the community. And our work is to say, the ANC leadership must then communicate what are the measures that are being taken, but ANC members must also communicate to those deployed cadres to say this is the challenge that we are faced with in our communities because they've got access to them. And that's the work that we are doing to strengthen that machinery. That's the gist of what we've discussed. But also the Commission noted that there's a mixed messaging that comes out in the ANC. And that mixed messaging, particularly the Commission participants blamed the parallel communication from members of the ANC, and we have said there must be respect of the ANC communications protocols on a position articulated by the ANC from the DIP that members of the ANC, NEC must communicate that, because our view is that DIP must at all material times, irrespective of their preferences and personal views, they must communicate positions of the ANC as articulated by its own conventions, its own ethos, principles, and what is discussed, not influenced by any other interest. And therefore, all of us must toe the party line when the message has been there, and we can then become this multiple voices, but one message. We also had, the discussion was not limited on the battle of ideas. We also had to discuss issues that related to broadcasting in the media space and also ICT. The first part on broadcasting, we acknowledge that broadcasting remains a critical player in disseminating information to the public. And it's also secured in terms of how it's regulated and so forth. And then we need to strengthen the broadcasting sector. In particular, the public broadcaster must be strengthened. The proposal that has been tabled is the issue of saying the SABC has both the commercial mandate and also the public mandate. In the public mandate, we want the SABC to be funded from the national fiscus, but also proposing a broadcasting household levy so that we can all fund, because the TV license arrangement is not working. It's actually impacting on the ability of the SABC to survive. And we said the SABC commercial wing must be allowed to compete and be regulated the same way that commercial broadcasters compete, and therefore they must be given that space. And the government has been mandated to finalize the bill that makes that distinction. But we want the SABC to also, and the public broadcaster level, to play a developmental role. Education channel must be used optimally. The health channel must be reintroduced. And history channel must come through, because we should not be watching other people's history but our own history, and also the history of the continent. But also the children's channel must be introduced, and those must be funded from the national fiscus. So that is one. But we've also noted in the broadcasting space or community media, there's been a proliferation of community media, which is not helping its sustainability. But there's not been a focus on building it to become sustainable. But when the media, and we acknowledge that when Media Diversity and Development Agency was established, it was to allow entry of black people, women, youth, and people with disability and previously disadvantaged communities to participate without the onerous sunk costs that were required. But there was intention to accelerate or progress community media. Instead of getting community media to be stuck in one place and not progress to become commercial, we're saying there must be a path that is made to allow them to progress, but they must be equally supported, and the regulations must be reviewed because they are very onerous, so that they can then be competitive and commercial. The other issues that we focused on the issue around spectrum and acknowledging the work that's done to release spectrum. We say spectrum is a national scarce resource, but its release and assignment, because we're going to do further assignments of the spectrum and licensing, it must be done to allow also the transformation of the sector. Therefore, black people must participate, women, youth, but also that spectrum must not be used only for mobile telecommunication. It must be used in agriculture, health, education, and mining, and other sectors, and also to the introduction of new industries. In that regard, we said the spectrum licensing and release, we had a over 17-year delay in the country. We should make sure that it's released at a minimum at the same timelines that the ITU, International Telecommunication Unions, prescribes for the release of the new set of spectrum, so that we are not left behind because of technologies. We've also dealt with the issue around access, universal access to connectivity, that we must make sure that there is universal access to connectivity and ensure that fiber to the home deployment is possible. And then the state digital infrastructure company that is being concluded now, it's in terms of its establishment or its consolidation, must then be awarded spectrum, one, to do the developmental mandate and allow SMME participation, but two, to consolidate the government fiber infrastructure across to enable participation of SMME to transform the sector at more favorable terms, but also for the rollout to rural areas. And that government must do a rollout, a roadmap for the shutdown of 2G and 3G in consultation with industry, but also the rollout of 4G and 5G, including to rural areas, because they cannot be left alone if the economy is going to be digital. And I think the last thing that I just want to emphasize on this one is also the commitment that government must make sure that we develop a blueprint for the digital economy, because the digital economy is not the future, it's here. And our target to say by 2030, 30%, at least 30% of South Africa's economy must be digital. So by 2023, government must release a digital economy blueprint for the country to say how are we joining ourselves to there as we prepare both to digitize and digitalize government, but also to digitize and digitalize society. And the last matter on the post bank, that by 2023, the post bank must be corporatized to become a state bank and must be the one that is distributing social grant services to our people. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Kumbuzo, for the highlights of the policy discussions on the Battle of Communications and the Battle of Ideas. We are now going to open the floor for questions. So what will happen is that we allow them to ask all the questions and then you answer. Okay? Do we have a roving mic? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Let's start with this team.
Bali Tetani from Newsroom Africa. Mr. Nchaveni, you speak of a broadcast levy aside from TV licenses. Did you perhaps also explore the era in which we find ourselves where more South Africans are making use of streaming? I'm here. Okay, it's Mbali Tetani, Newsroom Africa. You spoke of a broadcast levy aside from TV licenses when you speak of the public broadcaster. Did you also maybe perhaps explore in an era where we're living, where people are making use of streaming services and are not making use of traditional media? And if you speak of a broadcast levy, how is that going to work in an era where people are not necessarily consuming traditional media? Thank you.
It's Christian de Plessis here from Netwerk 24. Minister, did you discuss in the Commission what the views of the ANC are about how the media is reporting on the ANC? And then just secondly, to Mr. Mobe, so how does the process work going forward? Is the Commission's recommendations after they're presented to plenary, how does the process work going forward? Yes, thank you.
Velimtiane, SABC News. Two questions. The one is on post office target by 2023 to become a state bank. The question is, what are your views, or what has been the policy proposals that this state bank will focus on? Is it just going to be about releasing social grants, or is it going to be developmental in nature in terms of having funding for the SMMEs and other entities that will need support, financial support? It's on the SABC funding. There are a number of proposals that have been tabled, but the question is they only become a debate and that has got no end deadline. What's the deadline of finalizing these proposals for the funding of the SABC?
It's Ndayedzone Tonje from Power FM News. Just on the post office, 2023, is it a realistic target, seeing that it's literally a couple of months away? And also, media, there's a lot of community media that are spiraling out. Did you touch on the media development agency's role in terms of capacitating those community media, because they play a primary role in making sure that these community media are sustainable? Thank you.
Hi, Tim Cox from Reuters, and my apologies if you've already been asked this. But I wondered if you had discussed the step-aside rule and what conclusion was drawn, if any, and if also the nationalization of the central bank was discussed, and if any progress was made on that front. Thanks.
You realize we're dealing with battle of ideas. We're dealing with battle of ideas. So step-aside doesn't get to be discussed everywhere. It falls somewhere. So this is battle of ideas, communications, SABC, Coast Bank. Yes. Okay.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Kanya Karata from Newsroom Africa. Just two things for me, just on the issue of the branches. I think the last time we were here, the 2017 policy conference, the diagnostic report spoke about how there was actually a lack of ideological discussion within the branches.
Ideological discussions within the branches.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if that has improved, and whether or not there were any debates around how to improve the level of ideological, or to increase the substance rather than the form that is currently taking place within ANC branches. Yeah, no, I think I'm just going to end it at that. Thank you.
Okay.
Are these all the questions? Okay.
Thank you. I thought I had somebody referring to a minister. There's no minister sitting here. There's a serious comrade sitting here. Maybe just for my credentials, I'm a member of the PEC of the ANC Limpopo. I chair the subcommittee there on ETC, but I'm also considered an expert on media and ICT. So it's on that capacity that I'm sitting here. So there's no minister here. And I was a rapporteur of the commission, is the basis at which I speak. So I'm Comrade Kumbudzo. Those of you who know me in another life, because I see my professor is also here, so she can call me her student. So, on the broadcasting levy vis-a-vis the non-consumption of, the non-traditional consumption of media, that's why we're putting a levy. Because what is critical is that the public broadcaster in particular must survive. It's good. The survival and sustainability of the public broadcaster is necessary for this country, even for both commercial media and public media. So we need that levy. And that's why we're removing the TV licenses, because the TV licenses, those who work in the SABC will tell you, they've just become a burden because it makes the SABC unsustainable financially, because they're sitting with a large debt which they cannot convert. So therefore, that's why we want to make sure, and we are aware they've been given a waiver both by the Minister responsible for Communications and Digital Technologies and the Minister of Finance on what the board must decide to do around the TV licenses. That waiver they've gotten. But we are going to put the broadcast levy so that all of us contribute to the survival and sustainability of the SABC. Linked to that is the issue that the SABC must broadcast content that is relevant, both educational, informative, and entertaining, so that we keep the South Africans there. But also that's why we talk about introducing the History Channel, because your streaming services will not provide us with that, because we have no control on their content requirements. Though in the Commission we've also proposed that there must be a governance framework of how that must be explored to make sure that everybody competes on fair terms, because you can't have people who don't pay tax, who have no license requirements to come in, who just come in and they do whatever. They're not regulated in terms of content, what they can produce or not produce. But in other jurisdictions in the EU it's been done, we must do the same here. And in the US it's been done, we must do the same in South Africa. For that there's that firm proposal that the government must do that one. And there was a question around whether the Commission deliberated on how the media reports against the ANC. I'm looking at the head of DIP because he was in the Commission. Obviously, that's why we've noted the anti-ANC sentiment both in the media and in the public discourse. But our responsibility, our view is that the ANC can communicate to its members and to South Africans despite the media views, because our branches must be the lifeblood of the communities where they reside. And therefore our branch meetings and community meetings that, remember, at a branch level, the branches are not only going to meet for their own sake, they must also convene community meetings on topical issues that affect their own communities. The ANC branch is not debating only about ANC policies, it's not debating only about ANC leadership. The ANC branch also debates about service delivery in the community where they are. They debate about safety in the community where they are. So the branches must continue to convene public meetings to communicate the ANC view. During the apartheid period, the ANC was never supported by any media except the underground media, but it communicated to its membership. That's why it got the support in the country. So we're going to go back to that, and that's why we're part of strengthening our ability to communicate through unmediated channels. But also, the social media platforms are not only available to the media, they are available to the ANC, depending on how the head of DIP and his DIP collective then runs the social media to make sure that South Africans can feel the need that when they need information about the ANC, the breaking news is not on the SABC or on any other platform, it's from the ANC page that will communicate timelessly and make sure that it has the following. So we have got the channels. So we are not going to rely on third parties to communicate our position. We are going to communicate, but we'll appreciate a non-antagonistic media, a progressive media. We're not saying it should not be robust, but we want the media to be fair, and that's why we also complain through the right channels if there's been unfairness against the ANC, and because those provisions are there, we are allowed to do that. And then it deals with the issue around whether the ANC branches are discussing the ideology as well. The ANC branch discusses both the ideology of the ANC, but the responsibility of the ANC as leader of society in the community. Because leadership of the ANC in society is not only at a superficial level, it's what you lead in your branch. We expect that if there are service delivery challenges in that branch, the ANC branch must lead that thing, supported by the mass democratic structures. And part of the work we are doing to make sure the mass democratic structures work is to deal with the issues, the challenges within SANCO, which the ANC branch must lead the resolution at the branch level. And then there was a question around I'm going to deal with the broadcasting issues in one go, on the community media and the role of the MDDA. So the Commission was very specific around the proliferation of the media. I'll give you an example. In Mbembe, you've got 5 community radio stations. They can never be sustainable. Targeting the same market, they can never be as sustainable. So we're saying the MDDA, instead of continuing to get an ICASA license, new ones coming through, make the ones that are there sustainable. Centec, we are aware that Centec has sent notice to many community media that they're going to switch them off because they've not paid transmission fees. But if MDDA was using the funds to make sure that the transmission fees are paid or whatever they are subsidized, those media will be sustainable. If the MDDA was building capacity in the community media to run as profitable enterprises, there will be a different issue. If MDDA was championing the amendments of the regulation, for instance, in terms of licensing, majority of you, I know that there are 45 radio stations who had to be switched off because they did not apply for the renewal of their licenses. Commercial broadcasters, when their licenses expire, they can write and request an extension and all these exemptions they get. But community media does not have. If they don't apply by the cutoff period, that's it. It gets switched off. Those are the things that the MDDA must be championing. So the Commission spoke about how do we recapacitate the MDDA role to play a supportive role, but also not to keep the community media stuck where they are. Bay TV and KZN1, why are they not progressing to become a commercial TV station? Because they've got that capacity. MDDA should be playing a role to do that. And part of that, we must amend the regulations and legislations that make sure that they cannot progress upwards. And allow them to progress upwards because they've proven their mettle in the space. And they play a very effective role in communicating issues that relate to their own locality. So there was a full discussion on improving the role or strengthening the role of the MDDA, but also making sure the legislative and policy environment is amended to allow community media to be sustainable at all material times, and that we must stop the proliferation, because you can have so much TV stations, you can have so much radio stations. It cannot be. There's a number in terms of population size and viewers, and you cannot be competing as if we are unlimited, and there are new platforms that are coming through that are also very competitive. Then there were issues around the SABC funding, to say by when. It has been an ongoing discussion. So the levy should come through in the bill that is going to cabinet and then go to parliament. That proposal will come through firmly, and how the commercial wing and the public wing must be managed to come through strongly. But we have also acknowledged that in terms of health, and I don't know how many of you lived in the era of Salt City, that there is provisions for education and awareness in the Department of Health. That funding, in terms of awareness, part of it must go to the health channel of the SABC. In terms of education, the departments of education have programs to make sure that they can communicate through the media on education content, true educational content, not normal briefings. And that funding must also be directed there, but it depends on whether the SABC board and management will be able to then actualize that. But those decisions should be available as a resolution, and the deployees of the ANC in government must make sure that it happens. And the SABC bill should come through by end of this financial year, should have been submitted to Parliament. That is the commitment. And on the question around whether the post bank, not post office, post bank, post office is a different animal. They are separated. The final bill to separate on the post bank is in Parliament already for their consideration. So the target is not very firm. The fit and proper assessments of the board, so that we can have a fully fledged board, because there is a board which is just low. They are being finalized now with the relevant authorities, and therefore the board should be able to come through. And related to that is the target of end of 2023 is not far-fetched, it's realistic, it should be achievable. Because you should recall that this resolution comes from the 53rd, if not 52nd conference of the ANC. So it has been in the works for the longest time. So we need to make sure that we can conclude that work. And on the issue of the mandate of the development bank, is not only to of the Post Bank is not only to disperse social grants. The mandate including, remember, there are people who remain unbanked in South Africa, is to make sure that everybody who's unbanked can be banked because of the reach. That's why the proposal in the bill is to say they must use the post office infrastructure that is existing to make sure that they can have the reach and the footprint that they have. They are lucky they're starting with a footprint that is already countrywide, very intensive. Secondly, the other issue is to say, how does government use the facilities? Because there's also a proposal that is in the works to say government banking must then go to the post bank as a state bank. Why you do that? Because we can then use that to intervene in funding SMMEs, allowing participation where government can take risks on previously disadvantaged community, youth, women, people with disability, and rural area people, where the commercial banks will not do. If you recall, in 2020, when the credit guarantee scheme, when the banks were given, the commercial banks were given a guarantee for credit for SMMEs and also for businesses that were collapsing, they simply stuck with their traditional clients and did not want to expand anywhere else. Despite that, government said for anybody who fails to repay, government will then guarantor and repay. So the state bank will be able to step in those matters. So it's not only for SMMEs, but also for other interventions where there will be enough resources through the state bank to intervene to grow the economy. Because remember, majority of our challenges in the economy was that access to funding or growing this economy has been a challenge. But when you have a state bank and have that capacity, you should be able to grow the economy. In terms of those questions that relates to me and the commission that I was a rapporteur for, I think I've covered those. I didn't cover the issue around the step-aside rule. I thought the briefing was done. And also the central bank issue, it was also coming in the Economic Transformation Committee, and I think I've covered the issue around the branch discussing ideology. There's firm proposal in terms of the constitution that was dealing with constitutional amendments in terms of the membership renewal and how the membership process of the ANC to make sure that you've got more substance in the membership of the ANC than any other thing. Those proposals have come through. Thank you.
No, thanks, Comrade Kumbuzo. Just to also add, as head of DIP in the African National Congress, and to also help members of the media, DIP means Department of Information and Publicity. What we have done to drive the point that Comrade Kumbuzo was making around making sure that we push our own narrative as well was to consolidate ANC Today. In the past, ANC Today was just a simple letter from the president. You now have got access to ANC Today. It's a proper digital publication. It comes out every Friday. Actually, just this Friday, we distributed our ANC Today, which was a special edition focusing on the policy conference. Last week was a special edition just focusing on the legacy of our Deputy Secretary General. We also went as far as increasing our own social media reach. We had just fewer than 400,000 followers on Twitter and even on our own Instagram and Facebook. In the 4 years that we have been there, with the things that we've done, the digital campaigns that we drove, we've been able to push that number to just over 1 million. Now, these are not bots. These are real people who follow the story of the ANC. And what did we also do? We also went as far as consolidating how we communicate with yourselves. Unlike in the past, we now use various other platforms to be able to send you, whether it's press statements, invite you to our briefings and all of that. Actually, Comrade Kumbuzo, we had allowed for 200 journalists to attend this. We now have got 453. Which now begins to tell you that the platforms that the ANC is using to communicate with yourselves are quite effective. We're using our portals to allow to be able to accredit you and all of that. And because we've got communications protocols, the expectation is that all those who speak for the ANC will have to make sure that they subject themselves to all of those protocols and always stay on message, not necessarily reflect on what is their own personal views. And we have seen this working. Actually, we are able to also activate the relevant sections of Rule 25 if you are seen or making utterances that bring the organization into disrepute. We've already acted. I mean, I don't want to mention comrades, but there are comrades that we've already acted upon using the communications protocols and the relevant sections of the ANC Constitution. This must now demonstrate how effective these instruments that we have introduced over time are working. So there's quite a lot that we are doing in the communication space, just at a level of ANC communications. Beyond what Comrade Kumbuzo was clarifying, there are also issues that the DIP of the ANC has done to be able to consolidate messaging of the ANC and make sure that even if you have got multiplicity of voices, it is still one message that comes out there. The narrative of the ANC must be understood to be one out in the public. As it relates to the question you asked around what will now happen, decisions taken at the policy conference are recommendations to the 55th National Conference. So whatever we agree on here is a recommendation to the conference of the ANC, which now becomes the highest decision-making body of the African National Conference, of the African National Congress, which sits in December. So the policy conference is very important as a precursor to what needs to happen at the National Conference. So,
Is that now the recommendations for the policy, the National Conference, or does plenary have to still approve the recommendations? And when will we know which recommendations have been approved?
Okay, let's say for instance, the issues that Comrade Kumbuzo has deliberated upon are highlights coming out of the commission of the Battle of Ideas. Plenary engages, takes certain decisions. Decisions taken by plenary then become recommendations to the National Conference.
Maybe just to add, when we conclude this conference, there will be recommendations, so you may not have the document tomorrow. There will be recommendations that will then get captured. They'll be processed to the NEC, and then they are sent to branches to further engage on those recommendations, because it's not final. The proposals came through, branches engaged, came with recommendations. So you should not be surprised that, say, on one issue or the other, there may be 2 different recommendations or 3 different recommendations. It's allowed to allow branches to further engage, so that by the time they go back to the National Conference, which will be in December, they then go with a branch mandate that says, in terms of this matter, there were 3 recommendations, our preference is this, but there were these 3 recommendations, we think there can be a hybrid of this recommendation and we can come up with recommendation number 4. But actually, in terms of what was recommended by the policy conference, we think we can improve on those recommendations, and our proposal is that. That's why this is not the beginning or the end of engagements on policy, ANC policy discussions. This is just a consolidation of the refined views of the ANC branches as they come to the policy conference. And then we go back to the ANC branches to say, are we on same point here, or are we on different? So, and we don't want you to come out and say, no, the ANC, they are differing, there's this view, there's that view. No. We, as somebody has said yesterday, today we are not producing a Bible for the ANC. Today we are producing draft manuscripts for the Bible that will be adopted, or the Quran that will be adopted in December. And when that is adopted, then that becomes the ANC policy, which all of us, leaders in whatever capacity, branch, at whatever structure, deployed cadres, must make sure that those resolutions are implemented. And in our commission, we said the ANC-led government, through the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation, must then do a template which the deployed cadres in government must then say, in terms of resolutions of the 55th conference and those of the 54th conference, how have they implemented that? And that's part of the recommendation, so that we can trace the recommendations. Because people think, and that's why the question of saying, is 2023 as it relates to the post bank not too close for you to be able to meet that target? So no, this recommendation has come from a long time ago. There was work in progress. Now we must be very decisive in terms of implementing those resolutions. Because you have always been accused, ANC have got very good policies. Nobody of you can question that. But the challenge has always been on implementation. Now we're saying part of what we must monitor and improve in that battle of ideas is to be able to say, we took this resolution as a party, and we mandated our government to implement, this has been implemented. If not, what would have been the challenges? And we can all engage as South Africans in terms of the successes of implementing those resolutions, but we should be able to give you a clean and honest view of our progress with implementation, because we cannot rely on yourself as media in terms of implementation. We must come out and say, this is what we have implemented. You can come out and say, but the evidence on the ground is pointing to differently, and we can engage on that part and say, how do we improve on that implementation? Thank you.
Thanks. Follow up. We have to take archives, ne? Okay, we can. So step aside, central bank, those have been addressed. So step aside would belong to organizational renewal. The other ones were addressed as part of ETC. If there's any specific recommendations that we make out of here, I'm sure we'll be able to engage with yourselves during the week. Actually, the ANC is going to be having numerous other engagements going into the national conference.
Afternoon, Tsepo Moy, SABC News. What was the Commission's view on the current delays with the digital migration? That's one. And then the Commission's take on poor connectivity that we're seeing in some government departments. Poor connectivity with government network infrastructure. Like, Home Affairs, where we often hear that their systems are down and they cannot offer service to the people. And then lastly is on cheaper network, especially data being available to the poor.
Thank you. Moloko Mloto from ENCA. Kumbuzo, I think I heard you saying that you want the Post Bank to start dispersing social grants 2023. Does it mean that recipients of the social grants will have no choice to continue receiving their grants either through retail stores like ShopRite checkers, but what about those who are currently receiving theirs through commercial banks? Secondly, I'm just wondering why, considering the fact that already you have the African Bank, 50% of its ownership is in the hands of the South African Reserve Bank. Another 25% is in the hands of the Government Employees Pension Fund. Of course, with other smaller commercial banks or commercial banks owning smaller percentages. Why are you not considering to use the African Bank as a state bank, considering that it's got the national footprint, it's got the infrastructure? Why do you want to revive the Post Bank, which is moribund? More so because you also want to own the South African Reserve Bank, nationalize it.
Okay. Is that?
Thank you. Actually, the Commission noted significant progress made on digital migration. We've got 5 provinces that have been switched off, the provinces of Northern Cape, Free State, Northwest, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga. And the Commission urged the government to conclude the digital migration before the end of this financial year. And you should remember that the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies announced the 30th of September as the last date for applications for those households that are poor that must apply for set-top box assistance of government. And also, you must also note that maybe before I move to the next one, you must also note the Constitutional Court said the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies must give the members of the public sufficient notice in terms of allowing them the ability to apply or to decide whether they want to apply for set-top boxes assistance, those who qualify. And that notices, and the court said the minister must take into cognizance the fact that other notices were given previously and other work has been given. Since 2012, households have been applying for assistance of set-top boxes, so now the date for closing to apply is 30th of September. And when those applications have closed and the work of installing continues in the provinces, because because we need to install set-top boxes to everybody as government has committed. And when that date comes through, we should be able to, or even before that date, government should be able to access to say whether, at what period will they have concluded installing for every household, so that they can then determine the date of analog switch off and consult with both industry and the public. So that work, the Commission has appreciated the progress made, because this is the first time in the country that there are provinces that have switched off, that they've migrated fully, and the spectrum has been released to the telcos, those who have done, who participated in the auction of the spectrum. It is for the first time since 2006 that achievement and that progress has been made, and there's a clear path to analog switch off in the country. But also you must note that in the terms of the country, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition has prohibited the import and distribution of analog TVs in South Africa as of 1st of April 2022. There are no more analog TVs that are brought in the country, and also the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies has then promulgated guidelines to allow consumers to be aware of which ones in the market are digital television. So in the country, we are expecting that in the next 2 years, or even less, you are going to have no analog televisions around. And you should also note that there is a national coverage of terrestrial network in the country. It means anybody with a digital television or IDTV can be able, with the use of an aerial, can be able to plug in and do manual search or auto search and get their digital television. Those who live in areas that are mountainous, that the signaling cannot work, there is provision for the satellite coverage, and that satellite coverage has been available, and in the market there are decoders also for satellite coverage. So there has been serious progress on that matter. The Commission appreciated that progress and encouraged government to conclude digital migration soonest, so that we don't have congestions of network, because we cannot achieve the rollout of 4G and 5G to rural areas if analog television is still available, because you will not free the necessary spectrum for that part. And in terms of poor, it's not poor connectivity that you have. In where you have departments of Home Affairs, Department of Justice, Department of Police, where you have network failures. There are 3 factors to that. One, we're still using applications that are based on old technologies or old language. And for the sake of national security, I'm not going to mention the applications that are still using natural adabas. Even myself at school, I didn't study COBOL and adabas at all. But imagine if in my age I didn't study those languages. You don't have people to maintain those languages. Those applications are very high high in consumption of bandwidth, but they are also very slow. For instance, if you have to print a salary advice, you run a full batch. You don't run, to say you want to print a salary advice of Muluk or Mulot. You run a full batch of everybody sitting here. And that's not sustainable. So that's the one factor. But also the network of majority of these departments is not compliant with the upgrades in terms of speed. They are not even sitting, they're sitting on edge, majority of them, but they have to move to at least a 10 megabits per second transmission. We have a plan to improve all of them as part of the SA Connect to be at 100 megabits per second. And that's part of the work that we are doing on SA Connect, to make sure that government can digitize and digitalize. I think the Minister of Communications Digital Technologies announced that by 2023 March, we need to be paperless, and to do that, you should have network capacity to do that. The State Information Technology Agency is working fervently to make sure that the network upgrades with the departments are done, and we're going to put the necessary schedule out with the relevant departments to improve. You must make an acknowledgement that there has been an improvement in Home Affairs. But the third issue is the issue of when you have load shedding, and we have batteries. Batteries cannot run for more than 4 hours, but if for more than 2 hours. If those UPSs run for the 2 hours and the load shedding is more, then you're going to have a challenge. But also theft of those batteries and those generators that are there, that are backup. That has been an issue. That's why the Commission supported the recommendation that was made by the Commission on Economic Transformation on saying there must be a ban on the export of scrap metal in the country to protect critical network infrastructure that is being damaged because of theft. Most of you see the copper cables that are stolen, both for the towers and also for electricity, the rail networks and all those things. So, but that happens because of the scraping of metals. And then you raise the issue of cheaper data. The commission, had a discussion around government working on a proposal around data as free basic data without burdening the fiscus, the national fiscus. There should be those modalities. And on post-bank, visa and social grants, if government has to use its own muscle and power, government entities must be able to use the muscle and the power and make the interventions that are required. The first part, you say, why not African Bank? African Bank must be supported to remain a commercial bank that competes, that is owned by black people. Because the other banks are not owned by black people. So why should we make a bank that is owned by black people, make it a state bank? Black people must participate in that, so we need more banks to participate in that space. So our support for the African Bank is that it must remain viable. Even the interventions that were made by the central bank to save the African Bank was to make sure that we diversify the financial sector if we are going to have transformation in this country, because access to capital and access to funding is critical for the diversification of the economy. So I'm not going to deal with the ownership of the African Bank, whatever. It has to be supported to be viable as a commercial bank because it's owned by black people. In terms of the post-bank will have to do, because currently the arrangements that are being done have been done with the post office. Post-bank must do its own commercial arrangements if it's sustainable. And I don't understand why should we take government money to generate interest for commercial banks when the state bank can generate interest on its money and use it for other interventions. So the post bank will have to say what is viable and what is in its commercial interest in terms of how it disseminates and distributes social grants. If we have to move everybody, because our proposal is to say government employees must be paid from the state bank. You could take your 40%, we can get into that account and you transfer it to any other bank of your choice, but that money must start into the state bank. Because it's our money, we need to make sure that we can raise enough, because the more you deposit money into a bank account, it generates interest. Those interests, some of it you earn, some of it the bank uses for transformational interventions. And we cannot be apologizing in terms of the interventions that we need to do to transform the sector and to raise money for government to be able to intervene. So that's the sum total of it all. Thank you.
No, thanks, Comrade Kumbuzo. This now brings us to the end of the briefing on the Battle of Ideas. We are moving straight into culture and heritage. Thank you very much. Susan is here. She's going to be giving you highlights on archives, culture and heritage. Comrade Susan, it's rolling coverage. You need to come through. I'm sure you have been sufficiently clarified on communications. Yeah, it's is it not rolling? Hey. Yes, yes.
Well, those are live visuals coming through from the 6th National Policy Conference. Again, this commission focused on the battle of communications and the battle of ideas. Kumbuzo Njaveni updating us in her capacity as a PC member of the ANC in Limpopo, as well as an expert on media and ICT. Obviously speaking about quite a number of issues involving the public broadcast, the survival of it, as well as its relevancy to date in terms of content, and touching on the 2023 post-bank deadline, being able to distribute grants to South Africans at large. Also at this weekend, speaking on the sidelines of the ANC policy conference, Minister of Home Affairs Aaron Motsoaledi says that it's not only Lesotho nationals who are implicated in the rape incident that happened in Krugersdorp. This was obviously news just in. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Well, it looks like there are several nationalities involved.
Okay. No, thank you very much, members of the media. We need to just try and keep it at analog level. Must keep it low. So members of the media, we are proceeding now with the second briefing on archives, culture and heritage. So I'm with Comrade Susan Shabangu. She's a member of the archives subcommittee, together with Comrade Obed Bapela is also part of that subcommittee. They participated in those engagements. They will give the highlights, both of them. After giving highlights, we'll then open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Comrade Pule. I want to start first by thanking this opportunity for us to make a presentation on behalf of the Archives Committee of the ANC. As the ANC, the section of arts, culture, and heritage, it's one area which has not been given a lot of attention since 1994. And over a period of time, we have not been incorporating these matters in our work as the ANC. But where we are now, one of the key issues which we've agreed is that we need a commission which will look at the issues of arts, culture, and heritage, because it's some of the areas which deals with the history of the ANC, but also history of our country. Therefore, one of the issues which we are recommending to this policy conference is to have a standalone commission on arts, culture, and heritage. And we are happy that, or satisfied that, at least as we work through it during the NEC period, that has been accepted. Hence, we're tabling it today to the policy conference for adoption, or as part of a recommendation which will be finalized in December. We believe it becomes important because where we are today, part of our culture and heritage, they've been left behind. And one of the things which we're looking at as the ANC, it's the National Liberation Heritage Roots, which it talks to our history in our liberation struggle, but it also talks about the various institutions which we have, some of them which have not been transformed, but some of them are dying. So we believe that for us to move forward, we need to preserve our own culture, but also preserve heritage in our country. So what we are going to do today, we're going to indicate or come up with recommendations which were debated or discussed during the commissions on how best are we going to take this process forward, both at national, provincial, and local government level. As we know that the issue of arts, culture, and heritage, it's cross-cutting in government, but also in the private space. So I believe that we are here today to give recommendations in making sure that our history is there, but it's also incorporated into our education system. And as we know, some of the heritage sites are collapsing, and how best do we make sure that we capture them in our country without losing any of our history, or a history which deals with some of the few in an exclusive way and leaving others. So that's what we are presenting today. I'm going to ask Comrade Obed to take us through the issues which are recommendations, and part of those recommendations have been agreed to by the Commission as part of recommendations to be finalized in December.
Thank you very much, Comrade Susan Shabangu, and to the Program Director, Pule Mabe. And good afternoon to you, journalists, and then the viewers at home, those who are viewing, and those who are listening on radio also, good afternoon. Indeed, the commission had to look at culture as a standalone commission. It has never been there since 1980s. So we then had called for it to be a standalone commission. It has been granted. Very fruitful engagements and discussions that took place. And then as a result of that, even in December in the conference, it will be a standing alone commission. It's not the first time that the ANC reviews its own impact on certain policies and arrange portfolios for it. As you remember, international relations used to be not even there as a standalone commission, but realizing the work of internationalism in the country, we had then to establish the Department of International Relations. And here, the commission was agreed to, and the establishment on Department of Arts and Culture and Heritage is being proposed post the conference, and hoping that the delegates at the conference will agree to the recommendation, and coming out of that conference will then be establishing this department led by an NEC subcommittee, which will then be composed by those who will be elected. Part of the work is to centralize the work of the arts, culture, and heritage as it did in the 1980 globally, where the ANC used culture as a mobilizing tool for our citizens, and also O.R. Tambo, having said that, we'll need to continue with this tool to mobilize people for the society we envisage, and a society that is there in the National Democratic Revolution, that is a non-racial, non-sexist, united, and a democratic and prosperous society. So we then have to then begin to sharpen this particular tool to achieve that particular objective. Amongst the issues was the issue of the impact of the copyright and the performance protection bills. And we felt that the two bills should be urgently be passed by Parliament, which will assist in the protection of the creative industry and their rights, and in advancing the economic interests of the industry and arts in particular. The Commission noted, however, that consultation was not as adequate, and therefore we need then to go to the sector, engage them further, listen to their issues that they've raised, and then begin then to also accommodate them in the bills. I know that there's resistance from the US and the UK and the EU in general, because some of the homogeneous rights that they are now owning, they will then lose their rights of owning. And then those like Imbobe music and then all those others that they are using in many productions, then will then benefit the South Africans, and South Africa need to come. We know that they are threatening that if we push these bills, they might then punish us in the AGOA arrangements and trade agreements. We are ready for that, and we don't want AGOA obviously to be impacted, because there will be a lot of jobs that will then be bleeding there. However, we cannot then give copyrights and performance protection to other people and so forth. And the Commission was quite strong also that the actors that participate in some of the international movies, they are not paid equally to those international actors that comes in and perform. You can look at majority of the movies that were produced in South Africa and in the African continent. Payment parities is not the same. So the Commission had also said these bills will help us in dealing with those. We also took a note that there are fiscal challenges. However, the budget cuts that affects arts and culture and heritage should then be re-looked at, so that we position arts and culture as a center of social transformation and regard it as a national priority. The Commission also recommended that the ANC should promote intergovernmental cooperation of the departments that are bearing on arts, culture, and heritage. These include, but not limited to, sports, arts and culture, Department of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Environment, Basic Education, Department of Defense and Military Veterans, Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Department of Social Development, Department of Tourism, Trade, Industry and Competition. I mention this because there's issue that there are more taverns in the townships than recreation facilities. And all these departments must then contribute in the space now of ensuring that we realign that space for more creative and then sports and then playing fields to be available for young people and reduce the number of them relying on taverns as a form of entertainment. But they need to go there and be creative and ensure that they can then arise as champions from their own provinces playing in the national level, but also looking at it as an economic activity, because if tourism grows on heritage sites and cultural sites, we are able to then to get those women and men who can then trade in the goods that are well produced there, the traditional goods that will then be selling to the tourists and so forth. Hence, this department are then called in to come in. And then we then looked at certain programs that we then said we need then to also support, as they said, the decolonization of the heritage spaces. And then, as you know, that there was a Fordist movement that was there. We need to give clarity, policy position, and then theoretical and organizational thinking around these issues, and give it guidance and direction. So, and also, which are the spaces, what needs to happen in those spaces, and so that we could then give guidance to our structures on the ground. As part of the decolonization project, also, the Department of Arts and Culture and Sport initiated the Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route, the South African chapter, and now they will be moving to the next phase of the program, which is the Southern Africa chapter around that. There were colonial wars, and then also there were liberation wars that we need to now to begin to recognize as a way of expanding our heritage and cultural heritage. To bring consciousness, in particular to the youth, about the decolonization project, and then bring debates and discussion that are focused, that are informing, then that will also be enabling the Department of Arts and Culture, Basic Education, to contribute to support heritage education in all the schools. The Commission also noted the following groundbreaking projects of African civilizations, the engagement with the House of Traditional Leaders, national symbols like the national flag, the distribution of the national passport, geographic places, names and standardization, copyrights and performance, and then also on the flag, then the issue was such projects also need to be engaged from low, bottom to up, rather than up, downwards. When we have to look at a heritage as a flag as a heritage, we also then begin to look, and there were contributions that says the flag must be flying in all the schools, in all government buildings, in all municipalities, as a way of promoting this heritage and the embracement of the flag. And then the other bigger project must then go through those particular consultation from below going upwards, so that we can listen to the arguments and the views and the sentiments of the people on the ground, and then not just announce major programs and so forth. Also, we also take pride in the accelerated implementation of the revise of the white paper on arts and culture, which ANC will then be contributing with its base document of 1993-1994, informed by the Ready to Govern and also the Freedom Charter, that we need then to begin to expand the role of the arts and culture, because in 1994, the department was given to the opposition ministries for 2 terms, and by the time the ANC person came in, the white paper was just limited to reconciliation and nation building and nothing else. And therefore, we are now going to be ensuring that this reform of the white paper, which has started, the ANC inputs will be wider and more impactful, really to begin to occupy space in that particular area. The women in sport projects were also looked at, and that the pay parity must be equal for women in sport to the men in sport. Coins and Heritage Route have discovered 13 nodal points across all provinces. That indicates that the Khoi had lived in areas not only confined to a space called Cape Town or Western Cape. So these will also be brought into the national space. Inclusive language development, including the repositioning of all our indigenous language, is also have been profiled in the discussions. And the recommendations of Ubuntu Botu values is one element that we said we are going to do, diverse in our cultural values. Ubuntu has really shaped the heartbeat of our society. We need to then rebuild and ensure, therefore, that with the values that goes Ubuntu of respect, respect elders, and then respect our environment, respect ourselves, can then be brought in. The promotion of fine arts, drama, theater, films must also be introduced in the historically advantaged schools for children, and so that those who are interested in arts can come in. This one was really emphasized much, and then the department has reported in the commission that we have 300 arts centers now that has been established across the nation. And these are going to be the feeder centers to the provincial theaters, because only 4 provinces have been benefiting in the theater space: Johannesburg Market Theater, Cape Town, the Artscape, Durban House, and then also the Klebecha now, as we call it. So, and yet other provinces don't have. So Limpopo is building one, Northern Cape is building, Northwest is building, and then so that these 300 arts centers that are spread across the disadvantaged communities can then bring the talent into the provincial space, and provincial spaces to see their kids also entering into the national space across any talents that are there, including the orchestra, that obviously there are issues and debates around, so that we can then begin to see the transformation informed by the development support that is there. The promotion and development of funding public and art institutions and their value chain must be developed and to competitive standards, but fair across all groups. On arts, ANC must use a bottom approach in the promotion of the arts and should recognize its power as a tool to mobilize society. Commission also recommended part of promoting indigenous languages, and the state must establish a publishing company or amend the mandate of the government printing work to also include the publishing company in it, so that we can publish the books, the stories written in local languages and about South African experiences. Because if you leave it to the private sector, languages publication does not happen. So the state must go and say, this is a market failure, when we need to move in there and then see if maybe the printing works can then begin with that company, so that you don't start afresh. The commission also noted the technology developments, therefore IR, in the digital space, and we need to digitize a lot of our work, including occupying the space in the gaming industry on telephones, so that our indigenous games can be seen. When you open your phone, you go to the gaming, you get Kung Fu, you get all others, but nothing about stick fighting, nothing about Iskamato, nothing about Iskatamea, and all those things. So we need then to also then say content developers must also come in, including protecting the rights of the artists on non-fungible tokens as proactive strategy. And then because I'm giving just highlights, I will then be also saying the protection and promotion and then development of indigenous language, including the Khoi and San from extinction, those that are facing those particular extinctions. And then therefore the commission had all those wisdom to say, let's also begin to protect our treasures. The burning of the library at the University of Cape Town was unfortunate. The burning of Parliament and other buildings put some of the country's treasures and heritage at risk. To mitigate this, the Commission recommends that a mass digitization program of our cultural and heritage treasures as one of the ways of safeguarding and preserving them should be the route to go. So therefore then I think we'll then take questions so that whatever I might have left out, then we can then engage. It was just more a summary of the inputs. Thank you.
No, thanks, Bra Obs. We've got 2 options. We can take questions, which is fine if we had the time, or I release yourselves to go to plenary, because the president is going to be, so we're opening the plenary now to yourselves. But if there is a burning question that you want us to entertain, we can do it quickly. Yeah. Where's the roving mic?
Engos, I have a couple of issues here, Pule. Don't marginalize heritage yet again when you're already here. A couple of things, 3 to be specific. On the financing of heritage sites. In 2018, there were issues around the Victor Verster prison. the last prison from which Nelson Mandela was freed, in a terrible state. There seem to be some disputes over who should fund it, whether it should be correctional or tourism or even arts. You're talking of building more, but those that are there now are not being maintained properly. So what is the policy around this? You're talking of tourism, and yet there isn't attempt to make sure that these tourist attraction sites are in a stage that tourists can go to. So that's the first point. Finance, who finances? Secondly, access to sites. You would recall in 2018, just after the new president was elected by the ANC, he went to Kuno, to the graveyard of the former president, the founding president of the Republic, was denied access by Mandla on account of some Tembu ritual that had not been performed at the grave. Here you have a grave site paid for by the state. It's a heritage site, and a family member refuses to provide access, not just to anybody, but to the president of the Republic. So this then speaks to issues around family and state. These sites are paid for by the state, and yet family members seems to have some family members. They have a say, absolute say, on whether there's access or not to these places. That's a bit weird. There's no outcry. I mean, I've seen your document here. There's nothing about that. Then you have what has come out as a selective repatriation exercise. Certain bodies are brought back to the country for a burial, others are left behind. It depends on which family makes a lot of noise. Mabhida is back, Kotani is back, Nzula is not back, the first black secretary of the Communist Party. Lastly, you have heritage assets being sold. I mean, one of the Mandela daughters sold Mandela's assets at some auction in New York. Prison key even. Shouldn't that be criminalized? I haven't heard anything about charges. And lastly, the law does provide for the state to expropriate heritage sites that are in private hands. There was an issue about the Sanlam building in PE, which was in the hands of some private owner, some Irish fellow. Sanlam building, a huge historical building where Steve Biko was tortured, Botha died, and a whole lot of people in the Eastern Cape. That was a center of torture, a serious memorial site. Government didn't do anything. There were all sorts of negotiations. You probably paid a lot of money, and yet legislation says you can expropriate. The original copy of the Freedom Charter was sold in London somewhere by some fellow. These things are being stolen. But there isn't much noise about that. Lastly, on the point of accuracy, in your report here, you say the house in Brantford, Winnie Mandela House in Brantford, has been going through some renovation. I haven't heard anything about that. Is that really true? That's my last point. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Lukanya Khalat. I'm from Newsroom Africa. Thank you very much. All right, so in the Eastern Cape, I know that there exists something called the Liberation Heritage Route. Now, I am not familiar as to whether or not there are any movements around the issues of the Liberation Heritage Route in the Eastern Cape. I understand now from this briefing that now that's going to be expanded. How do we expand into Africa and look at developing this when there's a route only in name but not function that exists in the Eastern Cape? Just a second issue. And then also on the issue of funding of heritage sites. I know that obviously I'm in Lily's Leaf. We saw the recent troubles that it went through. There's the District 6 Museum in Cape Town that is also in desperate need of funding. And then the issue that Ubaba Ndletshe and I had raised on Mamuwini's house in Brentford. What's the situation with that? I don't also just mean to, and I know this one is a little bit personal for me, but there is the Craddock Fall Garden of Remembrance that in Craddock, in the Eastern Cape. So far, since it was opened in 2013, government has spent about 45 million rand. It's had to be refurbished twice. It stands there, it's a white elephant. It doesn't get used for anything. The last time it was used was for something that was related to Fort Galata, that we did a memorial lecture there last year in November. I had raised issues with the Premier at the time because there was no water. There was no water in the toilets. We had invited a government minister. Imagine the embarrassment that we had to invite a government minister, but there's no water. Every time we try and deal with the issue with the district municipality or even with the local municipality, we get shoved from pillar to post. Does the African National Congress actually take the history of our people seriously? These are people who bled and who died for us to sit in this position that we are in today. Yet the actions that we are seeing is that our culture, our history, and who we are as a people mean absolutely nothing to the people that govern and lead us today, because they show that to us through their actions. Thank you very much.
Okay, these are the two questions we have. Just can you just answer this, and then we can get journalists to start moving to plenary.
No, thank you very much. This is a summary document, but in the main discussion document, we have really covered this, just to give you a hint of some of them. The maintenance of graves across the country by municipalities in a state of despair. And then there is a resolution that municipalities must occupy that space. We're asking them to look at the fence issue, the cutting of the grass, and the cleanliness. Families will then obviously visit and then really take care of their own graves, put up the tombstone. That cannot be done by government. However, in some of the graves, there are national heroes there. Enoch Sondonga, the right of the Nkosi Africa, is lying somewhere in the Eastern Cape, and the grave is in despair. And those are the normal duties and functions of the municipalities. We have highlighted it in the commission that we need them to develop a program that will make sure, therefore, that this becomes a standard across for all municipalities. Whether it's a township, rural, or a town, they need to be learned. And the museums are the responsibility of the municipalities by inheritance of their functions. But most of the museums across are not in a good state, and we then have to also to make sure, therefore, that municipalities then, but some of the museums must be transformed so that the chapter of the history of South Africa can be added. You can't maintain old museums as is, without indicating the local dynamics and the history that has occurred. So the expansion must also then begin to be as inclusive so that museums are transformed. The private NGOs' ownership and initiatives of some of the museums, as you have indicated, we had agreed that a policy must then be developed where the state has to take over. It can be at the national, provincial, or at the municipality level, so that some of those initiated private and NGO activities, like Lily's Farm and the others, If they are falling in the wrong hands or something is happening, the state might then have to come in there and so forth. And we did also discuss about the Biko House in East London. I know Old Mutual is the company, 90 million on that they are demanding. And we did speak that the expropriation element must then apply where there's resistance so that we can preserve this. It's part of those things that will be sharpened in the main document going into the policy conference so that we could then, we did an ownership of the national icons was also raised, that we need to own these national icons and not leave to the family ownership. Mahatu, Mandela, wherever they are resting, they cannot then be the right of the family to access or not. These people imagine a national liberation project. And then they came in there with the talent and skills that made them to be the leaders. And then therefore the state must then own, and we can then engage and open a debate because there are elements of ancestry, elements of the spiritual elements that we can ignore from the side of the families. But then at the end, then we need then to say, you can't exclusively below 70%, the state must have the right on ownership on those particular national icons. It was one of the issues that was raised there. A national acre for the burial of all national heroes. I know that the African way of life dictates that some will say, "Ngimfuna la eduzena, angimfuni in the national acre." But the national acre might resolve going into the future, some of them being brought there. And we don't want to sound like we are insensitive. I know in Accra, around Kwame Nkrumah, was brought in by his villagers to home, and the government came, so, no, from Guinea, we can't be in another country. And then they brought to the village says, no, we can't. They took him from the village, 3 burials that took place. We need to be sensitive on how to manage, and so those issues were raised from the floor. The selective on repatriation, we have agreed on a policy review on that particular issue. So it's going to be one of the policies that will emerge at the policy conference. It was in principle agreed to. Heritage sites sold and everything, we also had expressed a concern on this issue. But when we look at the policy gaps are many around those particular issues. We then have identified about 7 to 10 policies that will be crafted towards the policy towards the resolution national conference. And therefore we will then, so Mandela House was also reflected. There is work going on. The Winnie Mandela. I know Horton has been sold. It's now a private hotel. The Orlando House is something else, the Tafels, but then the Gauteng government has come in and took it. So those will be those issues that will then be governed and by review of our policies. But then the Branford House is under construction towards completion, so that we could then pride. Even Branford is going to be renamed as the Winnie Madikizela Mandela town. So as a way of that part of the struggle that must have emerged there. So let me not go in deeper into them. That the Liberation Heritage Road, we said complete projects that were started. And then because we said provinces identified 3 start-up programs, complete them, and then we'll keep on aiding over a period of time so that this liberation route will then touch every soul and country where things happen, including in Craddock. And then there will be then a route for tourism. That's why we're bringing tourism in. That's why we're bringing others, so that when visitors come, they're in the map, and then we can then begin to then attract them even to go to those sites, and then declare this heritage as a World Heritage Site, because currently they are just South African heritage sites. And the resolution said we need them to be recognized globally, so that then the heritage south of South Africa and Southern Africa becomes a global heritage element. Thank you very much.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Can we all proceed to plenary? It's an open session. The President is expected to deliver the closing address. Thank you very much, members of the media.
Came at the wrong time.
Yeah.
It was live throughout.
All on the channel.
Yeah, that's why when we see what Rasi is.
Oh, okay.
I agree because these cameras can't move out.
Oh. And then from there we'll move it out.
Amandla. Amandla. Viva ANC, viva. Viva COSATU, viva. Viva SACP, viva. Amandla. National Chairperson, Comrade Gwede Mantashe, Deputy President, Comrade David Mabuza, Treasurer General, Paul Mashatile, our former Presidents Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe, members of the National Executive Committee, the leadership of the ANC Women's League, the Youth League, the Veterans League, and leadership of the Alliance and broader democratic movement components, our stalwarts and veterans, and delegates and all comrades. We've now come to the end of our 6th National Policy Conference, and true to the democratic traditions of our movement, this conference in large measure has been characterized by open and robust debate, even where delegates had differences. There's always been a firm commitment to engage with each other and to find common positions. The engagements were done and underpinned by respect, a good measure of decorum, in some cases some humor. Even where voices were raised, it was always with a view to finding each other and reaching agreement. While we must continue to debate how we can best address the challenges our country faces, we are all agreed on the goals that we must pursue. We are all agreed that we must unite all South Africans to achieve the complete emancipation of all our people. We have noted that across all the commissions, there was a shared consensus that both the ANC and the government must respond adequately, urgently, and assertively to the challenges that our people are facing on a daily basis. The challenges include the burden of unemployment, poverty, crime, gender-based violence and femicide, corruption, social cohesion, racism, the energy crisis, and the rising costs of living. These are but some of the challenges that are urgent that our nation faces. Delegates recognize that these many challenges will not be resolved unless we intensify the genuine renewal of the African National Congress and the building of a capable, ethical, and developmental state. This means that we need to clearly define and articulate the character of the African National Congress as a non-racial, non-sexist, and democratic liberation movement that must continue to mobilize, to organize, and lead the motive forces and society in pursuit of the national democratic revolution. The renewal of the African National Congress therefore requires that we remain rooted as a movement amongst the people, and we must demonstrate a willingness to serve and make sacrifices, and must also be willing to acknowledge and address our weaknesses. Since our 54th National Conference, We have made important progress in implementing our resolutions on renewal and rebuilding, but we have recognized that at this policy conference that we need to act with greater urgency to implement the other resolutions as well, much as we have implemented a number. We have agreed here that the overarching framework for renewal needs to include, firstly, the renewal of the ANC's values and organizational culture and ethics. Secondly, dealing decisively with corruption and unacceptable conduct. Thirdly, engaging and pursuing the aspirations of the people of South Africa. Fourthly, taking responsibility to use the resources of the state for the people's benefit as required by the Constitution, economically, efficiently, and equitably. This task belongs to every member. It also belongs to every leader, every public representative, and every structure of the African National Congress. All the elements of our renewal framework need to be integrated into every aspect of our work in the ANC, in society, as well as in government. Policy Conference agreed that ANC branches should play a more active role in the renewal process and be well-rooted amongst our people. This 6th Policy Conference has affirmed our fundamental position that the people must and shall share in the country's wealth. This Policy Conference has agreed that we need to undertake extraordinary and urgent measures to accelerate inclusive growth, create employment, and alleviate poverty. We have also noted with great concern the impact of the rising costs of living on South African families and have made a number of recommendations specifically on rising fuel and food prices. We have called on government to act urgently to support consumers and businesses at this very difficult time. But these measures will not be successful unless they are embraced by all sections of society and unless all sections of society are involved in forming and undertaking these measures. We are committed to build an inclusive and lasting social compact. While different constituencies that must help to build this social compact may pursue different interests and may hold different views, we share a common national interest in unity, stability, growth, employment, and prosperity for all. We have discussed the respective and complementary roles that the public as well as the private sectors should play in developing our economy. We have called for the state to be strengthened, for our state-owned enterprises to be stabilized, restructured, and effectively capacitated to drive inclusive economic growth and social development. We have recognized the vital role of the private sector, particularly small business and the informal sector, including cooperatives. We've recognized that the private sector should continue to play a role in creating employment and other livelihood opportunities, and so should the public sector as well. And we have proposed a range of measures to unlock the huge potential of businesses of all sizes to emerge, to grow, and to thrive. We have recognized that our economic progress requires a secure supply of affordable and sustainable energy. Conference endorsed the actions recently announced by government to improve the performance of Eskom's existing power stations and to add new generation capacity to the grid as quickly as possible. It has affirmed the need for a diverse mix of energy sources and a just transition to a low-carbon economy that ensures our energy security, protects jobs and livelihoods, and does not compromise our industrial development. Expanded infrastructure investment should be accelerated to play a critical role in providing basic services to urban and rural communities and also improving South Africa's overall economic performance. We must use available means, including the new expropriation bill, to accelerate land redistribution. As the delegates to this policy conference, we are determined to achieve gender equality in all areas of life, starting within the ranks of our own movement, in every structure and in every program and in everything that we do. As the African National Congress, there must be parity. We have agreed that this is everybody's responsibility, and it's not only the responsibility of women. As part of this, the empowerment of women economically, politically, socially, and culturally must be one of our foremost priorities. Among other things, conference has urged the application of an overarching equality legislation and using procurement more effectively to empower women economically. And this is all set out in the reports that are going to be circulated from the various commissions. We are all agreed that all South Africans have a right to live in peace and security, and that no one should live in fear of crime, violence, or abuse. We are committed to work together to end all forms of violence committed by men against women and children. All delegates to this policy conference are agreed that the development and empowerment of our youth is vital to the future of our nation. We have agreed on the need to intensify our efforts to provide young people with quality education and relevant skills, to expand the various programs that bridge the gap between learning and earning, and to use all available policy instruments to encourage businesses to hire more young people. We are all agreed that every person in this country must, without exception, have access to quality education, decent health care, housing, water, sanitation, electricity, and safe as well as reliable transport. This means that we need to fundamentally overhaul local government and ensure that it is properly resourced, effectively managed, and it should be led by honest, capable, and well-qualified and committed people. The conference noted again the historical anomaly of the private ownership of the South African Reserve Bank and reaffirmed the 54th National Conference resolution that the bank should be fully owned by the people of South Africa. Delegates urged the ANC government to find mechanisms to restructure the ownership of the bank in a manner and at a pace that takes account of the likely cost implications for the fiscus. Delegates also urged that the process for establishing a state bank should be accelerated. All the measures proposed to grow and transform the economy rely on a fiscal policy that ensures that our national debt is contained within sustainable limits and that spending is reprioritized away from consumption towards investment. In this way, we can align our fiscal policy with our industrial policy, which should focus on rebuilding and broadening our industrial base. We have agreed to propose that the procurement system should by law be more open, more transparent, building on the initiatives for greater public access to all tender information. This conference has demonstrated more clearly that more than ever before, our common commitment to rid our organization of factionalism, patronage, and corruption, and to renew and to rebuild our organization is quite an urgent mission. It has made an unequivocal statement that we must fulfill the promise that we have made to our people to place their interests and their well-being first amongst all things that we do. We have reaffirmed the resolutions of the 54th Conference on Corruption and State Capture. The overwhelming view of the policy conference is for the retention of the step-aside provisions to enhance the integrity of the movement and its leadership. Conference also noted that there are strong concerns on the perceived lack of consistency in the application and implementation of this policy. Conference agreed that these must receive urgent attention so that the application of the guidelines is impartial, is fair, and is consistent. Delegates have affirmed the ANC approach to the report of the State Capture Commission and have urged that the findings and recommendations of the report form the basis of a society-wide effort to tackle corruption in all its forms. Over the last 3 days, through intensive and thorough discussion, we have developed a series of policy proposals on how to achieve our revolutionary objectives. Some existing policies have been affirmed, some have been refined, and some have also been changed. These policy proposals will now go to the structures of our movement for further debate before being placed before the 55th National Conference for consideration and adoption in December. Let us use the next few months to build our branches through political discussion, as we have done over decades, whether in our mass formations, as we have done also in exile, in prison. Let us turn every branch meeting into an umkhabulo session. Let us broaden discussion of all these policy positions, and as it was said earlier by Comrade Jeff Hadebe, the reports are going to be consolidated into a publication, and all that will be sent to all our branches for discussion. And let us use these meetings, comrades, to deepen the political consciousness of the hundreds of thousands of ANC members so that they may lead the fundamental renewal of our movement. Because we do believe that as we discuss all these proposals, through that we will be deepening and broadening the renewal process. This policy conference does give us hope for the future of our movement. It has sent a clear signal to our members, our supporters, and indeed to the people of this country, whatever our challenges, whatever our shortcomings, the ANC is alive. It has sent a clear signal that the ANC is committed to consolidate and deepen the freedom for which so many sacrificed their lives. This conference has made plain that the ANC will continue to direct its attention and its significant capabilities towards serving the people of South Africa, particularly the poor, the working class, and the vulnerable. This policy conference gives us encouragement that yes, the renewal of the African National Congress is unstoppable. And that we have both the means as well as the commitment to rebuild and to revitalize our movement. Our sincere thanks, comrades, must go to all those who were involved in ensuring the success of this 6th National Policy Conference, particularly our comrades in the SGO, the staff of the African National Congress, who have borne the brunt of the ANC's financial challenges and difficulties, but who have had time and again, have also demonstrated their commitment to the cause of their movement. And we must thank them sincerely. This conference has determined in virtually all the commissions that the resolution of the challenges, financial challenges that the staff of the African National Congress is facing right now must be addressed as a matter of priority. I wish to thank all the comrades who've been involved in the preparations of the documents, as led also by Comrade Jeff and the others who worked tirelessly to make sure that indeed we do have this conference and that the discussions took place as they did. I wish to thank all of you delegates to this conference, the representatives of our alliance partners and our other formations. This 6th conference has effectively prepared the path towards the 55th National Conference of the ANC. Let us now go out to our branches, to our communities, and to all social formations to report on these deliberations and to work together to decide the direction of our movement and of our country. As they say, the African National Congress is the way to go. And indeed, this is the way to go. So, comrades, I wish all of you as delegates and all others who've been here safe travels as you go home to your various places until we meet again in December. The ANC lives, The ANC leads and our struggle continues. Thank you very much. Amandla.
Amandla, kayibambe kancinci nje. Hold it, Limpopo, hold on a bit. I can't help it. Comrades,
Right, that was President Cyril Ramaphosa giving his closing remarks there.